A woman in a man's job.
I don't know, what do I think of that phrase? What do you say to that?
"100 years ago, there was such a thing as a man's job because less than 10% of married women worked. But the events that set the war machine in motion also made a huge difference to women's lives in the UK.
The First World War was a really interesting time for women in the transport sector. Prior to this, women had been involved in relatively low status, low paid jobs. And then when the First World War starts, more and more men are called up for service, and there's a shortage in staff in the public transport sector around the country. So women eventually are called up to take on some of the roles that men had to leave behind. These women found it incredibly empowering to be employed in this sector. They got a free uniform, they were given quite a lot of authority, and I think that made them feel quite important. They were really contributing to the war effort.
At the end of the war, men came home looking for their jobs back. The women who had served as bus conductors and station staff were handed a thank you note and sent home.
Between the two wars, women continued to work in the transport sector, but reverting to those traditional roles, so in catering or working in offices or as ladies' room attendants.
With the outbreak of the Second World War, it was clear that women would be needed in great numbers to keep the country moving.
The recruitment of women happened more quickly, and they took on a much wider range of roles.
Women's work kept many cogs of the wartime transport machine turning. One of the crucial tasks on the Underground was fire prevention.
If all this dust, paper and fluff was allowed to pile up, you'd only need one spark and woof.
The crews of cleaners called themselves fluffies.
They go down on all fours to sweep and scrape up tons of fluff and dust that we have left behind in our travels. It coats the insulators of the conductor road. Charlie, walking along there, is the foreman. A sweet job for a fella who likes a little bit of fluff.
As in the First World War, women were often used as unskilled labour and paid less than men. We do not even have written evidence of some of the most impressive feats achieved by a mostly female workforce. Their contribution has been passed down by word of mouth.
Waterloo Bridge, as you know, is a vital transport link, and apparently it had been built by women during the Second World War. This story has been kept alive by the river boatmen who referred to the bridge as the Ladies' Bridge. We have quite a lot of oral history of people witnessing women working on the bridge.
At the end of the Second World War, men started to come back. And again, it was expected that women would give up their roles that they'd assumed during the war for the returning soldiers. But actually quite a few stayed on, and we see a shift in the attitude, and women took on greater roles from there onwards in the transport sector.
In 1965, Barbara Castle made history as the first female Minister of Transport. Unlike buses, it would be 4 decades before the next one came along.
Transport Minister Barbara Castle visited the Railway Technical Centre and toured the workshops. Half of British Railway's new carriages are manufactured here. A welder's eye view now. Not easy without deranging the hairdo.
Barbara Castle's biggest achievement was getting the Equal Pay Act passed in 1970, followed by the Sex Discrimination Act 5 years later. And with this, there was no holding back women. They began taking the helm in transport and in politics.
The 80s was a time of big hair, fashion. Margaret Thatcher was still in power. It was a time of wanting to work in London and feel the excitement of the 1980s.
At the tender age of 19, Anita Patrick was the first woman to set foot in Earls Court Depot, where 400 men worked.
My first day, I actually turned up and I remember walking along this long corridor and all these shutters came up and there were actually men looking through the shutters as Me and another lady were walking through and I think, what have I let myself in for? London Underground was a very different culture, a different place to what we know now. Having women walking into their depot, for them, maybe have been a bit frightening.
Joan Saunders Rhys was one of the pioneering women who became train operators in the 1980s.
I felt so proud being a train driver. There was me at the head of a train, taking a train from A to B with 1,000 customers and making sure they got to their destination safely.